I'm going to be talking about what I call digital storytelling and the power of immersion tonight. And I want to make three major points. I want to look at storytelling as something that is immersive in itself. It's uniquely immersive. And I want to talk about storytelling plus interactivity and how that's even more immersive. And then make the final point that interactive digital storytelling is highly effective for immersing users. And the material I'm talking about tonight, the references, come from two sources mostly. As Warren mentioned, I've been working in interactive media for a long time now, since 1990 really, and I'm still doing it. I work both as a consultant and as a writer, and right now I'm working for a startup company in the Bay Area, and I've worked on a number of games. I've worked on smart toys, I've worked on virtual worlds. It just goes on and on. I've just been very lucky that one thing has led to another, so I've had a very varied career. And then about 10 years ago, I decided that the kinds of things I was working on and the kinds of ideas that I needed to have to be able to do this work would be valuable to other people, I hoped. And I decided to write a book about it, which was the first edition of this book, which is just going into the third edition now. It's coming out in May, and thanks to Warren, I've been able to add some new material about ebooks and interactive apps of different kinds. And so a lot of what I'll be talking about tonight comes out of the research I did for the third edition, and even going back to the first and second editions. So why am I talking about immersiveness at all? What is immersiveness? A lot of you talk about engagement. It's like a very close cousin, I'd say. It's the sense of being inside of a story and being part of a story and having some kind of control over the story. So it's something that is very valuable to enveloping the user and keeping them hooked into the story. And it makes you really care about the story's outcome because you have a part in the story to play. And in a sense, the story is the meat and potatoes of digital experiences. Now, I recognize that not all forms of digital entertainment are necessarily interactive, but to me, interactivity is really what makes it so different. I have, the last 2 years, been speaking at a conference in LA about web series. A lot of web series are not interactive, so I recognize it's a growing form. But basically, web series are not so different from, say, very short TV shows or short movies without the interactivity. So also, and we have experts here. We're Junko over there. She and I were talking about digital storytelling because we come at it from a little bit different perspectives. And so I recognize that there are other definitions of digital storytelling, but I thought I should share mine, which is really simple. It's using digital media to tell stories. And I'm looking at it more from a commercial point of view, a big scale point of view, while I know that the kinds of things that you talk about are more for scholastic experiences. Teachers are using digital storytelling now as a way to teach children how to put together narratives and also to get them to work on things like history projects, personal stories, family stories, that kind of thing. So there's a shared interest in storytelling, but it's a little bit different. Digital storytelling is possible thanks to this little guy, and the laser pointer doesn't work up there. I'm a little scared to be using this. I'll try. But Anyway, this is good exercise. Thanks to the computer chip, and it makes all kinds of things possible. Things like ebooks and video games and transmedia storytelling, which is not something I think we've been talking about at all here. But I'm going to be doing some case studies. I'll talk about some as I go on. And for those of you who haven't been working in transmedia storytelling, I'll talk a little bit about what makes it different. And virtual reality, smart toys, and many more forms. In my book, in the first edition, I covered about 11 different genres of digital storytelling. In this book, I talk about even more because so many new things have come along. Things that we can do with social media, interactive television, second screen TV, all pretty much brand new stuff. So I'm going to start by talking about story. What is story and why is it immersive? And I live in New Mexico, and I'm surrounded there by one of the earliest forms of storytelling, which is rock art. And it's really fascinating to see the different pictures that people have put on the rocks. And some of them are ancestor figures, deities, and stories of the hunt, which is very common. Sometimes they're stories about migrations of villages. But these rock art, they all have stories to tell. And when I did the first edition of my book, I looked into where does storytelling come from? And I found out that biologists believe that the ability to tell stories is unique to us as humans. It's sort of hardwired into our brains, and that it serves an important function to us humans because it helps us strategize, plan for the future, because we can look at the past thanks to our stories. And our stories give us lessons that are very useful to being able to survive. And there's no other species, as far as we know, that can tell stories. Maybe they'll find out someday that dolphins tell stories or manatees tell stories, but I don't think that's going to happen. So interactive digital storytelling is really part of a continuum of really old forms of stories. And it does the same thing that all stories have done. It can capture the past, so that covers the big field of nonfiction storytelling. And it can transport us into imaginary worlds, so those are fictional stories. And what I think is really important about storytelling, and we haven't talked too much about it here, but it can elicit intense emotions, and that's one of the hooks of storytelling. And stories can be very inspiring. They can inspire us to do great deeds, to go to war, or be a hero of our trade union, or all kinds of things. We learn from our past great deeds that other people have done, and we want to walk in their footsteps. And stories can also be used, obviously, for teaching and training. And we've talked quite a bit here about educational games. We haven't talked too much about training games. I've worked in that field too. It's not too different from doing educational games, except educational games tend to be more playful. But there's a whole world out there of people who devote their entire careers to training games. So what exactly is a story? My definition is pretty simple. A story depicts characters who are caught up in a series of dramatic events, depicting those events from their inception to their conclusion. So it's a bunch of events that are strung together, and they have some kind of connection. They are interrelated, these different scenes, and we have characters. And I didn't mention before that I come out of the world of television and feature film. So that's where I got my background in storytelling, and everything I learned in that field has been very helpful, and I've been able to apply it to this new field. So stories in general have characters, they have a plot, they have settings, they have challenges and conflict, and they have an emotional context. And I'll be going through all of these different elements. I'm going to start with setting. And a setting is really critical to what kind of story you're telling. Its setting is really simple. It's where your story takes place. But if your story takes place on a tropical beach, say, or in outer space, things are going to be very different in those stories. You're not going to have a beach boy, say, pop up in outer space, and you probably won't have an alien pop up on your tropical beach. So it helps determine who your characters are, what kinds of events might take place, the mood of your story, and what kind of genre and style you're going to be using. So settings, when I do a story, it's one of the first things I think about. Where's my story going to take place? And then another extremely critical element of storytelling is who your characters are. And characters are essential. They bring your work to life. If you don't have characters, you might have a game like Bejeweled, say. Without characters, the work can be entertaining, but it's not going to be at all the same. A good character pulls you into the story. We really care about the character, or we might fear the character or hate the character, but we're going to have some kind of emotional feeling about the character, and they can be very entertaining. And without characters, we don't have conflict, we don't have drama. It's the characters who produce the drama of your story. So for some of you, probably all of you, this is pretty basic, but we've got two major types of characters we need to think about. One is our protagonist, our hero. That would be the guy up there, Superman. He's the guy we're rooting for, we're cheering for, or her, obviously. And the antagonist is the character who's in opposition to your main character, who's preventing your main character from doing what your main character really wants to do. And I'd like to emphasize that the antagonist doesn't have to be evil, doesn't have to be a bad guy, though that's what we usually think of when we think of an antagonist. But to be a good antagonist, you just have to be a character who is preventing your main character from reaching his goal. So, for instance, you can have a family drama and say your protagonist is a teenage boy who wants to be in a rock band and wants to be a rock star, and dad is a CPA who wants the boy to go to dental school or have a solid career, and you can see where the conflict would come in, and so you have a struggle between them. So it's the struggle that forms the heart of your drama. It forms the conflict in your story. And typically, as in my little example, your protagonist has a goal, and goals can be of all different kinds, but it's what gives your story energy. Your protagonist wants something very dearly, something close to his or her heart, and is trying to get there. And some goals in superhero movies, it'd be defeating an enemy or saving the world. Or we have murder mysteries. We talked a little bit about murder mysteries. They make great stories because of a very definite goal that our detective or our hero, police agent maybe, has. And sometimes a goal is just to win someone's heart. But generally, it's very hard to do a story without your protagonist having a goal of some kind and then having a struggle to get the goal. It's the goal that helps shape the plot. And the plot is what happens in the story, what happens next, and when it happens in the story. I'm not going to get into the details of how plots work. We did a little bit of that when we were talking the other night about Arthur Miller and his class, which sounded really fascinating. But finally, we've got emotions, and I think without emotions, we don't have a story that pulls you in as effectively, because it's the emotions that connect us to the story. It connects the audience and the narrative, and it makes the work richer and more memorable and far more meaningful. And we have emotions coming from two directions. They can be the emotions that the characters are expressing, and it can be the emotions that are elicited by the story itself. But having a story with a large emotional context is, to me, a hallmark of good storytelling. I'm the sort of person who can get teary even with a good commercial, so I'm an easy audience. Oh, there are other. I'm glad I have some fellows here.
It's usually the diaper commercials, but that's okay.
It's the Clydesdales that get me.
Christmas Clydesdale, yeah. Oh, you like the Budweiser one?
Yeah, I love them. I just think about them and I start, oh, I don't want to go there.
Ladies in the crib with P&G.
We all have our little weaknesses, but yeah. But you know, if you can make people get teary in a 30-second commercial, you're doing a good story. So, you know, try to do that in a larger project, and you've really got something good going. So, I've been talking a lot about story just to sort of set a foundation here. But what is the connection between digital storytelling and immersion? And that's what I'm going to focus on now. Digital storytelling, as I said, usually involves interactivity, and that's what makes it fascinating to me, and that's why I got in the field in the first place, because I wanted to see what kind of stories you could do using interactivity. It was something so new at the time when I first saw a couple of very primitive demos of what people were doing in this field, and they really didn't know how to handle it at that time, but I saw one of the first demos. I think Norman Lear produced it. Maybe some of you have seen it. It was a little street on the screen, and you had a mouse or some kind of controller, and you could control where you went along the street. You could go into buildings. You could poke around inside the building, come out, walk down the street further, and go into another building. And that just blew me away. Did anyone ever see that? Was I the only one? Well, I thought, gosh, if you could do that, think of what you could do in a story. I mean, that was just really exciting to me. So that was in the 1980s. And that's what compelled me to investigate the field and get into it. So interactivity helps produce the immersiveness in a story. And with interactivity, we have choices, and choices of all kinds. For instance here, which way do we want to go, to the right or to the left? What kinds of actions do we want to perform? We usually get a variety of actions. There are verb set, things like do we want to smile, do we want to frown, do we want to stab someone, do we want to run away from someone, do we want to shoot the gun? These are all things we can do. This comes out of the game world primarily, but for any kind of interactive project, you should have some kind of verb set, things that you can do as the protagonist in the story. And also, you can have dialogue choices. And the game I'm working on right now, we're giving the main character dialogue choices. That is a little bit tricky, but it's really interesting to do, and how to do it. In the game I'm working on right now, it's for kids, some of whom will be too young to read. So how do we give them choices of what to say? And we're working that out with icons. So we also have choices in what kinds of objects to control. Could be a gun, could be a stick, could be a crayon. Just virtually any kind of object, could be a rocket ship. But through these kinds of choices, we're offering control over the story, some kind of control of what happens in the story and even the outcome of the story. And this, to me, is really important when it comes to works for children, particularly that digital story provides opportunities for play. And it's play that the kids love. Kids love to play, and there's so many forms of play that we can offer. We can explore, we can create things, we can use objects, we can offer mini games and challenges, we can interact with characters in different ways, we can make things happen just by clicking on them. And if you were here, and I think everyone was earlier today to watch the kids play, I mean, they loved it. They didn't want to stop. And it's the play activity that really is very uniquely immersive about digital storytelling, I think. And what's really interesting, another thing that makes this unique from other forms of storytelling, that you can be graphically inside the story thanks to an avatar. In traditional stories, you can relate to the main character, you can empathize with the main character, you can identify with the main character, but you can't actually step into the story and be that character. But with digital storytelling, you can. And the term, interestingly enough, comes from Hindu. It means an incarnation of a deity. It's a physical representation of a deity in a real space. So in digital storytelling, it's the character on the screen that the user controls, and it's generally the protagonist. And so you can directly enter the story thanks to your avatar and control what your character does. And this feels very real to people, to all of us. It feels like you have a lot at stake, and in many games and other works, your life even can be at stake, so it's a very personal experience. And sometimes in some works of digital storytelling, you are physically immersed, and it's not just graphically. You're right there in a partially created digital universe. This is a shot of a work called Flat World, which was produced by ICT, the Institute of Creative Technologies. Has anyone encountered that? They're in LA. It's a think tank between the Army, Paramount Pictures used to be involved, and the University of Southern California. All got together and wanted to see what they could do with digital technology. And primarily what they're doing is making training simulations. And Flat World was produced by them as a training simulation, what to do in a very dangerous spot. And I got to go through Flat World as the user, as the character a couple of years ago. And you're surrounded there by digital images. Ooh, this went backwards. The character in the doorway, and I'll try to, okay. Don't want to rip the screen. That guy is a digital character, but there's a human being in there. Now I can't see him. Oh, there he is, right there. So you're standing there, you're wearing 3D glasses, and it's a 3D immersive environment. So some of the images you see out the window are digitally produced. And they also have a rumble floor, so when a bomb goes off, and a bomb does go off, the floor vibrates, and then the digital character comes, says, "Get out of here, it's very dangerous." He warns you, and you go out into another room, but actually it's a set. They call it Flat World because they're using theatrical sets, not because they have regressed and thought that the world is flat. So you go outside of this room and you're in an alleyway, and there's some boys on the roof, and these are digital characters. They start throwing rocks at you. It feels very real, and you have to get away from them, and you go to another area, and other things are going on. So it's fascinating. So that's another kind of being immersed, another example of being immersed in a story. I don't think it's the kind of thing that most of us will get to work on, but it's really interesting to think about that kind of immersiveness. So now I'm going to talk about a few case studies, one of which I'm working on now, and two are ones that I've included in my book that I haven't personally been involved with. The first one is UQ Life. It's a startup company based in the Bay Area. I've been working with them for about 4 years now, on and off, on an as-needed basis, both as a consultant and as a writer. It's a very unusual project, so it's a little difficult to explain. It's game-based. It's an educational project with goals that are different from most educational projects. Many educational projects focus on things like reading and math because they're very hardcore, they're very specific. But in our game, though we do have some math and some literacy, we're primarily focusing on social skills. The CEO of the company is an expert on autism, and she got her PhD in neuroscience So we're working on things that you don't normally see in games. And, and what makes this pretty unusual is that the game is collaborative in that adults in the child's life can play in the game too. And they take on the role of different characters, and we give them dialogue to speak, and they can help the child. Whenever the child is stuck somewhere, the adult in the family or the mentor or the teacher can participate, and they can do this from anywhere. It's hooked up through the internet. It's a multi-platform environment, so it uses the web, mobile devices, and tablets. The technology has been a real challenge, but we've pretty much gotten that worked out now. And so one of the stories that we've been working on, and this is not the first time it's been done, but we're using Little Red Riding Hood as a vehicle for this game. And as Kate Wilson said, the fairy tales are very robust for using, you can bend and twist them in various ways, and they still hold together. And so we have taken the game, but we've modified it, or the story, we've modified it in various ways. It's for 3 to 9-year-olds. One thing that works very well in it is that it's got a very strong storyline. You know, little girl has a basket of food, she's trying to get to her granny's house, and there's a wolf lurking out there in the woods who could eat her or eat her granny. So what is she going to do? In our version, one nice thing is, because it's set in the woods, she can go in different directions. So she has many choices of how to find Granny's house. And of course, she can get lost, which provides some emotion to the game. And it really works well to support mini games and activities. I'm sorry I couldn't do a demo of it. It isn't far enough along for me to actually be able to show it. So I just have some screenshots. But this game also offers a lot of opportunities for collaboration as you go along. So we've taken the characters from Little Red Riding Hood, and we've retained them, but we've modified them to some degree. We've got the big bad wolf, we've got Granny, we've got the mother, and we've got the woodcutter, and we've got Little Red Riding Hood, we just call Red now. And we've added some new characters, and this has been a lot of fun to do. Primarily forest creatures that she'd encounter along the way. We've got a little squirrel, we've got a mouse, we've got a bee, and they do talk. So we've got these talking forest creatures. And what we've most drastically changed is the wolf himself, because in the fairy tale, he's a carnivorous wolf. He's very hungry, and he has no scruples about eating humans. Our wolf is not that kind of guy. He's kind of on the funny side. And what makes him really different is that he's got a pair of young cubs. So they're the little cubs. You can't see them too well in the screenshot. But he's a good daddy. Even though he's not the nicest guy in the world, he's not the meanest either. So here's a sample activity from the game, and this is some concept art. And this is an activity involving empathy. And I'm not familiar with any other games that have tried to do this kind of thing, but what we're hoping is that we can develop empathy or teach the kids something about empathy through the game and encourage them to be empathetic. So in this case, in the story, Little Red Riding Hood is walking along and the wolf comes out. She has just met the cubs and been very enchanted with the cubs. She thinks they're adorable, but she's been warned by this squirrel that she's befriended, Curtis, that not to pet the cubs. They're not little puppies, they're wolves, and they can bite. So she knows that there are cubs out there. And then she's walking along, and the big bad wolf comes along, and he's sort of friendly to her, but he tries to grab the basket away from her. And she grabs it back. But Curtis asks her, why is he trying to get your basket? And she says, well, she has a choice of things to say. Is it because he's a thief? Is it because he's hungry, or perhaps it's because he wants to feed his cubs? And so you can choose what you think the wolf really wants. And what's interesting here is if the child is having a struggle, the game has an assessment tool that can recognize that she is not able to come up with the right answer. And so it triggers a response from this character, Curtis, who then offers Red a pair of magic glasses. And when she puts them on, it will give her insight into what kind of guy the wolf is. And she'll understand that he's a good daddy and he wants to feed his cubs. So that makes the story a little bit different. And I wanted to talk about this a little bit because I think it's a good example of how immersiveness can work in a classic fairy tale when you adapt it to an interactive medium. It has a very strong story that just comes with it. It's just something that never changes. The story of this girl in the woods can get lost, can get attacked by a wolf, her grandmother's in danger. So it's got a lot of emotions. As the main character, you're invested in being Red and having her get to her grandmother's house without any harm done. She has a very strong goal. And as I said, her emotions, or your emotions, are highly involved. You care about the little cubs. You're afraid of the wolf. You don't know what he's going to do. You don't know how to behave. You're thrown into new situations. You meet new characters. You don't know exactly how to treat them, and you're afraid of getting lost. So all of these things add to the immersiveness of the story, and not to forget about all the choices you have in determining how your story plays out. And it can play out in several different ways. So the second example I want to talk about is Cosmic Voyage Enterprises. Has anyone encountered that one? This is one that was new to me. I interviewed this guy named Robert Pratton, who's an expert in transmedia storytelling. He's the one who told me about this because he was a consultant on the project, and then I interviewed the CEO of the company. So it's a transmedia story, which means it uses multiple forms of media to tell a single narrative. But each one of these media pieces tells a story from a somewhat different vantage point or adds material that other media doesn't. So all the different media come together to tell one big story. And as is typical in many forms of transmedia storytelling, it involved role-playing. You have an important role to play in the story. So in this story, you become an executive of a fictional company. And the educational goal here, kind of unusual, it's to teach fiscal responsibility, ethics, and economics. It's for high school students. Not necessarily the most riveting topics, but they found a way to make it really interesting. So as I said, it's a transmedia story, and the basic storyline is this. This company, Cosmic Voyage Enterprises, is sending a rocket into outer space, into the International Space Station, but something misfires, and the rocket hits this little town in Florida called Milledgeville. It's a fictional town, but it's made to seem very real, and it explodes in the center of town, causes a huge amount of damage, and possibly also releases toxins. And so your role in this story is to decide how the company should respond. What is the right thing to do ethically and financially? So it's made to be very believable and emotional, and some of the students who played it thought it was a real story. They didn't know it was fictional. They have a lot of very authentic-looking assets. For one thing, they have video broadcasts that look like real news broadcasts, and they give you updates day by day, what's happening in the town, what the company is doing, what kinds of things the scientists are finding out about the toxins. So it seems very real. They also have websites. This is a website of the little town that it hit, Milledgeville, and you can click on all the different things on the website, and it will give you further information. It looks like a very nice place to live. You can meet the mayor and learn about their milling operation. and so on. And you're thrust into this story in this very realistic environment, and it takes place in just 3 weeks, so it's a very intense experience for 3 weeks, and then it's over. And the students felt, as I said, it was very real. They felt that it really happened. And this was done for students in Florida specifically, so they thought it was maybe a few towns over. That's why they hadn't been to the town themselves, but it seemed like a real town. They felt like they had a significant role to play in how things would turn out for their town. And they were role-playing the part of executives in the fictional town, or in the fictional rocket company. And so they had to decide what the right thing to do was in terms of a financial compensation package for the town. And then they had to videotape it. And these videotapes were posted on YouTube. I think a few of them are still up there. But it was a highly immersive experience, and they learned firsthand through this game how to deal with situations like this and without bankrupting the company. So they had to weigh a lot of important decisions. So the third case study, and the final one I'm going to talk about, is really a goofy experience. It's called Love Plus. Has anyone here played it? I don't think so. It was a Japanese dating simulation game. It was made for Nintendo DS, and it came with a mic. And the goal was you played as a young guy, and you were hoping to court one of the girls in the story and make her your girlfriend. The mic played an important part because you could actually talk to your girlfriend, and she talked back to you.
That wasn't real?
I'm sorry. Wait. Oh, poor Darren.
Don't tell us, kids.
Oh. And it was also synced to clocks in the calendar, so you had morning, noon, and night. In the story, you had different seasons. You had spring, summer, winter, fall, and holidays, important Japanese holidays. And most important of all, your girlfriend's birthday was on the calendar, and you better not forget your girlfriend's birthday, or she's not going to be your girlfriend for very long. So you had 3 characters you could choose to be your girlfriend, one of these 3. The girlfriend, she was your love interest, but she could become your antagonist, because if you didn't treat her well, she could really give you a hard time. So this is an example of an antagonist who's not necessarily evil, she's just a young girl. But what made this story really strange was that it was played out in real life. If you won enough boyfriend points, you could take your girlfriend to a real place, a town called Atami, which is sort of like our Niagara Falls. Junko, do you know this town?
Atami, yes.
Okay, so she knows it's a real place. So you could take your girlfriend there and act like a real romantic couple. And which was,
Video game girlfriend?
huh?
You take the video game.
Yeah, well, you take the video game with you, but
Oh, the cutout dolls. I remember.
the whole town cooperated with a simulation.
Wow.
And you could actually check into a hotel and ask for a room with 2 futons, and they'd give it to you, even though there was no...
Weird. Isn't that weird?
The room seems so real.
They wouldn't ask any questions. They didn't see the girlfriend there, but hey, you know, they'd play along. And the restaurants offered special menus for romantic couples who were playing this game. And there were special tours of landmarks, and you could do all kinds of wonderful things, go to the hot tub and soak, and all these things with your girlfriend. So it was a very rewarding experience. And there's a little screenshot from the game. So it was obviously very emotional. It involved the most intense emotions that humans have, really, which is love and the feeling of losing love. So these guys were heavily invested in this game. They made critical decisions about how they should interact with this girl. And the way they acted had critical consequences. The girl could just tell them to get lost, or they could become their romantic partner. And as you saw, it was very real and played out in real life. So it was very effective.
What was the age rating on the app?
Young guys, 20s, K3.
I think I have an idea for a research study. I think it has to do with those young guys 5 years later.
There's a name.
But it
paper
wasn't
cuts
16
finally
plus
healed.
or anything.
Huh?
It wasn't 16 plus or anything.
No, it was like young guys out in the workforce. And there's a name in Japanese for guys who are kind of nerdy and not very skilled with girls. I can't remember the name. It's
Nerdy skilled with girl guys.
but it was particularly meant for these guys. And there's
You
actually
want to know the name? I got a tattoo.
there's actually an equivalent game, different in that it wasn't a simulation so much, but for girls. There are games for girls that involve romance too and boyfriends, but not as developed as this game was, Love Plus. So my point is that when you add story and interactivity together, you have highly immersive experiences that enhance the narrative. Simple as that. And all of these stories made their way into the 3rd edition of my book, which is coming out in a few weeks. And my publisher has been really nice and printed up some flyers, which I left on the table over there, with a 20% discount if anyone's interested in ordering it, pre-ordering it, or ordering it at any time. There's a code you can use. That's the end of my advertisement, but I just wanted to let you know about it if you should be interested. And so I think we've got some time for questions, Warren, and we can ask now, or if anyone wants, you can email me. I really do answer my emails, Carolyn@carolynmiller.com. So any questions? Darren, I'm sure you wanted to play this game.
It's the sequel.
The sequel, oh.
Yes, it's
I dread to think what would happen in that one.
paper cuts.
Sadly, I remember that game. Last week.
Do you really?
Yeah, never could win.
You're still
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
How was the project that you showed that kind of covered up the local disaster or whatever? How was that funded as a transmedia project? Was it that the school purchased the experience?
The state has been promoting education in that particular area, financial and fiscal responsibility, so a lot of the money came from the state. And actually, it did not cost so much money. They did it on a pretty tight budget. I don't know what the budget was, but they used their assets very well.